All right, welcome to the September, which should have been end of August webinar. I appreciate everybody that is with us today, despite having to shift it back. I was traveling back from Brazil and we had some other chaos stuff happening, so we didn't have the right timing for it. But we're here today and it's the beginning of September, so we have all the optimism that comes with a new month. Today, we're going to be doing the serverless panel, migration, Mindshift, and serverless DX tooling. We're going to talk about that, as well as our second topic, which is helping traditional developers adopt a serverless mindset. So there's a lot of really juicy, interesting topics and pathways that we'll explore out of these three topics. But before we jump in, I want to make sure to do a round robin of intros. With that, Benoît, can you introduce yourself and then hand it off to somebody else on our panel today?
Sure. Well, yeah, you know me probably. My name is Benoît. I'm a serverless developer at Serverless Guru, AWS community builder since last year. Just celebrating 1 year this month as well. And yeah, so always happy to be here and discuss some good serverless stuff. Over to you, Paul.
Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. My name is Paul Chin Jr. I'm a serverless developer here at Serverless Guru, and I love writing as little code as possible, so serverless is great for me. What about you, Sebastian?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sebastian Bille. I'm from the Swedish West Coast. I'm also an AWS community builder. I'm just generally a very big serverless evangelist, you could say, I suppose. I'm the tech lead for the platform services team at Polestar, and I also recently started Elva with a couple of good friends and developers, which is a serverless and AWS-focused consulting company.
That's awesome. Awesome. On that note, we should probably get you on the podcast, Sebastian, so we can dive deeper into all the cool stuff you're doing. It sounds like there's a lot.
Love to.
Cool. All right. Well, we are missing one. We're missing Ro today. He may join us periodically. There was some weird Chrome Safari issue with actually connecting to StreamYard, which is the software we're using. So TBD on that. If he pops in during our live session, we'll just add him in so you can hear his perspective as well, as I know some of the audience definitely wants to hear from Ro. All right. On that end, my name is Ryan Jones. I am the host of this evening or afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. We're going to be jumping into the topics. I'll be kind of setting it up for the panel. Some background about me, if you've never seen my stuff. Founder of Serverless Guru, and I'm in Puerto Rico. Learn Spanish all the time. Enjoy surfing. There's actually a wave report that on Sunday at 5:30 a.m. there's going to be waves, and so you can catch me at La Ocho if you're familiar. So on that note, let's get into it. The mind shift that comes from migrating to serverless. There's many different ways that we can tackle this question. The first one that we can start it off with is, hey, I've got this, more legacy. Legacy is a tough word, but if we say I've got stuff that's pre-existing and we've been running it containers or virtual machines or on-prem, something like that, maybe a different hosted cloud solution. And it's gotten older, it's causing us headaches, there's like maintenance upkeep. And now we want to migrate to something that's better for the developers, increases efficiency and so on, and gets more of the cloud sort of native benefits that come along with, connecting, let's just say AWS services together like that. So what type of mind shift kind of happens during a migration like this? To kick it off, let's go ahead and jump to Sebastian.
Sure. Yeah, so a good question, I think, and I think that when we talk about serverless and when like serverless is discussed, especially to like people that aren't fully into the serverless world yet, so to speak, it's often like the elasticity of serverless that's touted as the great benefits, and that you can scale to zero and that you can scale almost indefinitely, right? But I think that it's like almost more important to discuss like it's hard to overstate how expensive owning and like maintaining code is, and it's super important to realize, I think, that serverless, in my view, is very much about just shifting responsibility away from you, from the developers, from the teams, from even the organization itself, and shifting as much as possible of that into like the hands of your cloud provider. And learning to just embrace configuration over code, learning to I think that's the hardest part. As developers, I think we're often very used to, like, especially if you come from more traditional setups, that like the input point and the exit point of your code, that's the only thing that you can fully control. And it's quite a big shift from there for developers to realize that like you can and probably should nowadays own like the full application, almost like from request all the way down to the database and back again. And like as soon as you realize how honestly how easy and how fun it is to actually do that, and how good it can be to actually control the whole flow between those two, we can start to like actually focus on what's really important and the parts that's often neglected, I suppose. In many cases, you can start to focus on actually on the observability and the monitoring of your application, and actually owning the full application. I think that's really important step to realize when you're migrating.
Yeah, and I think that's super important. The thing that jumped out to me there is the IC versus like manual configuration when you're building stuff. So definitely, I was on a serverless team that went to a tech ops team, and I was trying to sunset EC2 instances, and the idea of like automating stuff in CloudFormation or some other Terraform or something else versus just getting in there and just like spinning up the server, SSHing into it, installing whatever you want, and just like Wild West style. It definitely is a shift, and it can feel like less control, but it's actually like a lot of benefits because you can just reproduce it over and over. On that note, let me toss it to Benoît. What are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think you guys just nailed it. Serverless is just about moving the focus from having to maintain any architecture or anything away from you, and just move it away to someone else that does it probably just even better than you. And you should keep the focus on what you are building, what is important for your business and for your customers. And that's where you can actually gain velocity and time to market a lot faster than just with traditional architecture. Now, I think that sometimes moving to serverless, it can be scary for the companies, it can be scary for the developers. Like there's maybe the fear of the unknown, something it's still quite new, still don't know how it works, you don't know how it's going to evolve. There's also the fear of losing control, like you're not anymore in control of all the components that your application runs on. And if there's an outage, there's nothing you can do apart from just waiting that they fix it for you. But I think that's the point. I mean, you don't want to be fixing it. Some other people will do it better than you if they know what they're doing. And you will probably lose more time just maintaining and building some sorts of services yourself than you will lose from that will gain from just trying to fix things yourself. Usually when there's an outage in AWS, it lasts a few hours most. It's most of the time not even the whole service, whole architecture that is down. So usually you're going to be fine. And now there's another fear maybe that some companies and developers could have, is the fear of vendor lock-in. And we've discussed that in the past as well. I think for me, I'm not afraid of it. It's fine. I'm okay with sticking to one platform. If we ever need to migrate for whatever reason, we'll have to put some effort into migrating and porting all the code and the infrastructure. But how many times are you going to do that? Maybe once at most, if ever. So for me, it's usually fine if you are locked in the vendor. Otherwise, you would just have to try to find some level of abstraction between all cloud vendors. in the end, you will just be locked into what is the most basic and common functionality that all the vendors have, and you will be stuck to that, and you won't be able to scale, to improve your product by just using the full set of features that a given vendor could have.
Yeah, I love this. And there was something that you made me think of, the vendor lock-in. I saw I think it's an old one from Forrest Brazil, but he did he used to do the comics and then he would post a screenshot when he worked for Cloud Guru. And then one of them is like the guy that's laying down flat. He's got his hands cuffed to the table. It says like CapEx. On top of him is like the technical debt that's like chained to him. And then it's legacy hardware on top of that. And then he has like a quotation. It says, "Sure am glad that I avoided that cloud lock-in," while he's like drowning in like technical debt and like hardware pressure and so on from trying to run it themselves. So there is sort of a funny, nuanced way of looking at it where it's like, wow, I avoided it here, but you're not even evaluating what you're actually doing day to day. So on that note, Paul, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So when we think about a developer mindset, when we're thinking about migrating some older technology to a newer one, there's, like Benoît said, there's always a little bit of fear, and there's always innovation, and you have to do the trade-offs, right? But if you've decided that the trade-offs are worth it, what is it that you have to really dig deep down inside? And I would say just like letting things go, right? Like, I think I've said it before, but serverless for me sometimes comes down to loving my servers so much that I have to let them go. I have to let them be cared for and taken reins by people who are very good at what they do, and you let them do it, and also with evaluating new technologies, a lot of times we worry about longevity of it. Like, is this like just a new hot trend? Is it going to stick around forever? And like serverless itself is a new hot trend and it is a buzzword, but underneath it's a cloud provider saying like, hey, we're going to give you a permanent home for the future, right? Like they're incentivized to try to keep you there. So yes, there is vendor lock-in, but when you choose a platform, you have to pick anyway. And the cloud providers right now are doing a pretty good job of being incentivized to give you more features, keep security tight. I mean, billions and billions of requests are coming through their system. And, that's a huge responsibility for them to take on, that risk of everyone's traffic, right? And they don't take that very lightly. AWS, most of my experience has been dealing with AWS, like specifically, and now that I've been in it for a couple of years, it's amazing just how resilient their APIs are. A lot of I didn't know what CloudFormation was when I started, and you don't really have to. We can get to that later in the whole tools and DX experience, right? Foreshadowing, but but that longevity is built into the system. So your mindset has to be, okay, I love my server so much, I'm going to let them go. It's fine. It's just another abstraction that doesn't add any value to me. I don't need to keep writing, like, listen to this port over and over and over again. AWS can do that for me. And over the years, like, you go back and you look at your CloudFormation templates, they still make sense. A couple of years later, I need to update this runtime. No problem. Change node 14.x to node 16.x, and you're done, right? Like, you redeploy your whole stack, and it's essentially just like some configuration in there versus tearing down an image, grabbing the right image, rebuilding it, putting all your starter scripts in, and all of that stuff. You can let all that go. Like, I know it's fun to craft and you feel really good about it, but it's okay. You can let it go. There's even more fun to be had in the application layer.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it was good foreshadowing there of the additional topics that we have about, hey, we've talked about some of the areas that do cause fear or tension, et cetera, when thinking about, shifting towards serverless. However, how do you actually go about attacking that problem? One thing I had like one more about this. I think that was a really big one about releasing control. And I did a talk at the developer conference in Sao Paulo, Brazil, a couple weeks ago, or maybe that was only a week ago. And I was talking a lot about the basically product and how serverless enables developers to spend more time on product and less on everything else. And everything else can almost be classified as stuff your customer doesn't see. And so when we think about what your customer actually cares about, it's the stuff they see. However, the stuff that developers care about, or more traditional development teams and so on, and operations and all the stuff that actually makes that customer experience good, the more traditional side, non-serverless with containers and virtual machines just running, the whole thing, they're looking at servers and scaling and load balancers and all this stuff that your customer doesn't actually interact with or care about or know about and shouldn't know about. And so there's a lot of time that gets spent on making that like perfect server setup and trying to make the best automation possible to like patch as many servers as fast as possible. And all those, like, all that is fun as a developer. But when we're thinking about what we're actually building and how it's actually used, it's a little bit sad that it goes away, because obviously I also enjoy writing scripts and stuff to do really cool things with virtual machines. But at the same time, it's that time gets reinvested, and you can take all that time and then put it into product features that your customers will actually use and interact with, versus putting it into how do we solve our database connection pooling thing is like not happening, and we got to like scale that, and we should have it do it automatically, and we need to detect it when it happens, and then throw these alerts and scripting out all that stuff to make that work, versus just making new cool stuff. So open floor, thoughts on any other things that y'all want to basically bring up around this topic before we kind of switch it up? Okay.
But I think you're both spot on in that like we're probably not fully there even yet with serverless. Like there's probably a lot more that we can abstract away, because in the end what actually matters is like the business logic that you and your organization is providing, and there's stuff still in there that we probably shouldn't really have to care about today, but that's really the important stuff. And just if your business is not actually configuring those servers or those load balancers or whatever, you shouldn't really have to care about it. In the best of worlds, your application code or your business logic should be the only thing that matters for you. So the more of these things that we can actually abstract away and put like the problems and the applications in the hands of the ones actually responsible for building it, the better, in my view.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And it's kind of an interesting thought, because obviously I love writing infrastructure as code. So it's like I like my YAML. I like doing it the way that I've been doing it for the past like 3-4 years. But I think if I was going to put myself on the spot, I would say, maybe the customer doesn't care about our YAML. That kind of hurts my feelings, but it's probably the truth, right? So it's like, seeing the next abstraction layer on top of what we're doing today, it's already being worked on by a lot of companies. So super exciting stuff happening right now. Okay, moving to the second topic we have today, helping traditional developers that are, let's just say, developers not working with serverless, adopt a serverless mindset. So what does it mean to adopt a serverless mindset? And how do you go about this process? And also another angle of that is, how do you help developers, right? Like if you're working at a company and you are that serverless evangelist, because as we know, a lot of times when a company is picking up serverless, there's somebody internally that went to a conference or saw a talk or played around with it themselves and got hired, and it's like trying to really push internally to get the organization to pick it up. But not everybody has that same level of knowledge and experience, and also the insight of what it can actually do. So how would you approach kind of that problem of helping bring people to a more serverless mindset? And kick that off, let's go to Paul.
Awesome. Yeah, it's going to require, a ton of context around the core of using a cloud service. If you think about getting people excited about using these services, then you can show real fast and quick experimentations because it's built for that. Like the ephemeral infrastructure part, it's easy to show like, hey, like spin it up, spin it down. Like it's fine. It's going to be, it's not as intensive of a process to procure these resources like they once were. And that friction that you might find is people not realizing just, what's possible and available to them through just a command line, like a single call through the AWS CLI. And also, I think for developers, traditional non-serverless developers, a big part of it is really coming to terms with owning more of the infrastructure, right? Like using your IAC tools and knowing that your local copy of like your local container or your local web server is like it goes beyond that now. Like you now have what's like Sebastian was saying, you now have the ability for your service and your feature to really reach from the database to a durable storage like S3 straight through compute on Lambda, and then all of the queuing things that you can do. And don't throw away what you already know. If you know like how to build super sick containers, there are more serverless container solutions available. Like think about what you're developing and what are like the worst parts of what you're developing technically. And I bet you there's a cloud service out there really just begging for you to try them and say like, don't worry about X, try this blazing fast buzzword. And part of it is evaluating it and making sure that it's going to be right for your needs. But a lot of times, like you're going to find that there is innovation here. There is toil being taken away by going more serverless.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's to me that kind of sounds like take like this one piece and then start like evaluating against other stuff that currently exists and then see if it can be done, faster and then plug it in. So maybe showcasing like, hey, you want to create a database, instead of spinning up that EC2 instance, starting up all the database stuff, hosting it, connecting it to the internet, running the, doing all that stuff. Why don't you just turn on like Aurora and then, use the link, the cluster link inside your application code. Awesome. On that topic, let's hand it over to Benoît. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, well, I think, you guys made this again here. There are different levels of serverless, and I think each step is always good to take. Like you could start with just using containers as a first step. Like you don't have to worry about using or maintaining any C2 instance or anything. Just run something in how we call ECS or Kubernetes. So it's kind of managed for you. You still have to do less work. Still something to do, but less. Usually, when it comes to like true serverless, so really something that is ephemeral, that you don't need to maintain or to follow, to track too much. It comes to learning all the building blocks that are available to you. Because if you come to from a serverful or a container world, you will probably have all these services running in maybe different instances or in different containers, but they're still running in a traditional way with maybe some code or some services that you maintain, or service that you just run yourself. But when it comes to true serverless, you will have to learn all the building blocks, so like Lego blocks that are to your disposition, that are available to you to build a bigger picture stuff. And you will have to learn how to connect them together. For a traditional developer, that could be something that is really hard to understand or to learn from day one. But there will be some learning curve. But in the end, it's usually it's worth it, because then you will truly abstract everything, not worry about anything, because things will just run for a few seconds, the time your code runs, or the time your process is taking care of your logic. And when that is done, there's nothing else you need to worry about. I think there's an old comparison or metaphor that they use to compare servers with containers, and they said servers are like pets. Like, you need to take care of them. You need to make sure they are good. They don't need anything, and you will already need to take careful care of them. Containers are like cattle. Yeah, just raise them. When you're done with them, just replace them, and that's it. I would see serverless maybe as a cat cafe. Like, you want a cat, you go to a cat cafe for an hour, and when you're done, just go away, and the cat stays there. You don't worry about the cat anymore.
That's the greatest. I've never heard that one, the cat cafe one. That's a good one. I'm gonna use that one more.
Yeah, that's great. It's so relevant because I was actually at a cat cafe maybe 4 days ago in Miami. And it was like the last day that they were like open, and it's, it is nice to enjoy the cats and then get to leave the cat there. So you don't have to take on the responsibility of feeding and giving water and giving rubs to like 12 cats. On that, nice transition. Yeah, exactly. So good segue there. Sebastian, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Right. You mentioned a talk that you gave before, Ryan, and which reminded me of a talk that I gave a while ago that I called "The Backend Engineer is Dead, Long Live the Backend Architect" or something like that, which was admittedly a bit of an attend-baity title, but like my sentiment was that like traditional developers, backend developers that only write code the way I see it is that we have to kind of evolve our mindset from that and start to actually take responsibility of more stuff and our actual infrastructure, which is hard, and it means that there's a lot of new skills to learn for a lot of developers, which can be very hard, and therefore I think it's a lot about finding like the right abstraction levels even behind serverless, like in the same way that like containers abstracts away the service, and serverless abstracts away even further. We can also abstract away parts that aren't really super, like that aren't that you don't have to understand or fully grasp from the beginning. We can start to abstract away. We have to, like, it's important that developers understand what they're running and stuff like that, but we also need to realize that like not everyone can spend their full nights to read and follow along with like an ever expanding universe of cloud features and services that are released, right? So like, for example, serverless framework is a tool that we've used a lot to abstract away the parts that you don't necessarily have to care about. I think that serverless framework has a pretty good balance of being explicit in the parts that you fully need to understand, but hides away some of the parts that you don't really have to understand. It's very close to like CloudFormation, and you have to learn parts of that, which can be or is very useful, of course, if you're going to learn it in the long run. CDK can be used in the same way, for example, like to wrap and provide your own constructs to help developers like achieve standards or meet compliance targets or something like that. But they can still be responsible and understand exactly what they're building, but they don't have to know exactly everything all the time, right? I also think it's very important, as you said, Paul, about removing friction. It's super important. If we expect developers to take on these responsibilities, we have to make it like fun and easy to deploy, to deploy early, and we help them with like linting, simplifying stuff, and standardizing stuff like logging, tracing, and stuff like that, and like removing the friction of like the worst thing for productivity and developer experience is not being allowed to test stuff. Like you see a new feature being released and something like that, and you go to try it out, and you get some access denied error because we hadn't updated that SCP yet, or whatever it is to include that new service. And in the same manner, make it safe, make it so that developers can feel safe in that what they deploy is to some way compliant. It can't really run away with cost, because they know that like there's some billing alerts or something in the accounts that are set up, and they can't really affect other applications, something like that, because everything is properly sandboxed and stuff like that, right? And finally, I think I like what Matt Coulter talks about with serverless first, and not making it as black and white. And we can start with a serverless first approach, like this, the most serverless way to solve the problem, and we take it back from there, make it like solve the problem in the way that works for you in your situation, and we don't have to be as black and white and say that you have to use these services of this solution.
Yeah, I love your breakdown there, Sebastian, and I think dialing to one of the first things you said, like the backend developer is dead, backend architect now reigns, sort of thing. I think it's interesting because especially when we talk about moving from more of like, a non-serverless legacy, and I'm trying to avoid the word legacy, but it really does capture sort of what we're talking about in like one single word. But when you have that, a traditional older development cycle, software team would be very siloed off. So you'd have operations, you'd have developers, you have QA, you have architects. All of them are working, separately. They're all tossing it over the wall back and forth to each other. And there's blockers all over the place. And there's middle managers that are like saying, nope, you can't do that. And so it's like with this new structure, I've definitely seen that happen, where saying, hey, like, what's the right word to describe what we actually do day to day, right? Because when we say developer, people don't think architect, but in reality, we're writing the infrastructure as code. We're also probably writing parts of the CI/CD pipeline or all of it. We're doing automation. We're also writing application code, and we're doing that entire piece is now almost one role, and it's not out of reach anymore. Like, that is a very attainable thing that you can actually hit as a single person, to learn both how the services interact with like queues, understand how they wire together, understand where your application fits into it, understand the deployment process. And then you have more of like maybe specialty stuff like, hey, we're going to build some PCI architecture. Okay, let's bring in like a PCI specific person that understands how to make sure that the architecture we're building meets those compliance requirements. But in like a day-to-day thing, it's very hard to draw like a clear line. And we get clients asking us for that sometimes, where it's like, who's the architect? Who's the developer? Who's writing application code? Who's not? It's like, no. There's not a team owning the infrastructure as code. The developers are writing the infrastructure as code while they're writing their stuff. Like they're saying, hey, this problem solved by a queue, this problem solved by an S3 bucket, and then they're writing the supporting stuff for it. And I think that that's a really big change that happened. And it's also super empowering. And I think that's a huge thing too. One of the things that Paul was talking about is getting people excited about it. I wrote a couple of things. Meet them where they are. That would be my advice. So if you're coming into a place either as a consultant or you're the serverless advocate inside of the company, if you're looking at the makeup of the team, don't just like throw everything away, move to Node.js or something, right? Like move to Lambda Node.js and you're on serverless framework, and they were doing a whole bunch of different things, manually creating servers or using scripts or something like that previously. Find that like bridge connection where you can actually help translate what's known today to what exists in this new environment, without sort of throwing everything out with the bathwater, because that's a good way. And I've seen it happen in the consulting journey, where came in, we started like building out serverless infrastructure for this healthcare company. And then the guy that was there for like 15 years or something, he saw me as like the absolute like problem and all this stuff. And he wasn't included in the meetings and included in the conversations. And he had all the knowledge about what everything did. And he basically left the team. And so all of the 300 plus servers and LD infrastructure and everything that was happening previously was kind of lost with that person, simply because we didn't, meet them where they were at. So that would be the first one. Help design patterns and then show the power of it. So it goes back to what y'all are talking about too. So if it's a Java implementation that was being done previously with like Spring Boot, let's make a serverless Java implementation. Let's show how we port the code over. Let's give them that full breakdown, and kind of show, now that you're doing that, these are all the other stuff that you get to do that come with this, the infrastructure as code, plugging stuff together with serverless. And then the last one would be showcasing the time savings. So the big thing is that if you're not spending all that time making the perfect server, well, am I obsolete? Absolutely not. Now you actually get to do more interesting, fun, cool, modern, cutting edge things that you never had time to do previously, because your role was more on the tedious tasks, right? And so, hey, our RDS instance isn't scaling properly, and there was a person that used to, and still is in a lot of companies, that's pressing a button to increase the cluster size, right? And monitoring that, and then doing that as their like sole job, right? Making sure the database never goes down. And that's still something that has to happen. It's not like that goes away completely, but now that person has a little bit more time freed up where they can start doing some more application coding side, and overall that increases their job demand in the market, increases their like wantingness to contribute ideas, which is often like pushed down by just the tedious stuff that we have to do on a day-to-day basis. So that's my long rant. Y'all crushed it on this topic. Hopefully, if y'all are listening, if you have any other strategies, definitely toss them over. But I'll open it up again. Any other thoughts before we switch topics here?
One thing I wanted to mention about mentality is, as developers are coming into writing things serverlessly and serverless first, especially on AWS platform, on the AWS platform. Early on, when I was first learning about just writing code, the person who showed me Lambda functions was like, it's an event-based system. Like, it's all about the events. And at the time, I didn't know what that meant. I just heard it a lot. And then I would read blogs and would say event-driven architecture and event this and event that. After enough practice with it, I finally understood what it meant. And I got the intuition around how serverless is able to sort of capture user intent as an event, and then you as the developer get to shape that intent through your system with all kinds of superpowers. And all you focus on is passing that intent around through different systems as this live event. And so the code that you write is actually more defensive. It knows what it's going to get. And then not only is it only going to deal with whatever it's given, it doesn't have to deal with anything downstream either, because you're hooking into things like queues and step function state machines, and you're just taking that one event, chewing it off one piece at a time, and sending it down further along the process. And what makes it so scalable is that in these humongous organizations with many, many, many services, a small like focused developer team on their domain can really just focus on receiving this customer intent, doing the cleanup that they need to, and then passing it out. They don't even have to specify where it goes. Like, the company architecture could say, hey, service, whenever you're done processing, just put it in here. Like, this is somebody like another architect or you think about it ahead of time, obviously, but you have a more clear, like, I guess they call them, the old school way would be like, what are those called? Enterprise service buses, right? Like, I first time I ever saw like a big old Java app, it was daunting. But now if I'm looking at an AWS app across different clients or projects, you're like, oh, okay, here's your SQS queue. I know how that queue is going to behave. And so then you start building this intuition about event-based architecture. And so for people coming into it, it sounds like nonsense now, but I just wanted to plant that in there because someone planted in me 5 years ago, and like it's finally coming to fruition, and I can see how well it translates like across many different projects.
I really agree. And I think it's as Ryan said, it's empowering to have that ability to do that, to take these like bite-sized challenges and just make something of it, so to speak. And yeah, and the same as you said, that Paul, that it really translates. Like, code, like you can understand and you can speak and understand and read multiple programming languages, and of course that skill carries over between jobs, between companies and stuff like that. But there's also always a learning curve. There's always new ways to do it, to write it, to read it, but like, as you said, if you've seen an SQS queue, even if you come into a brand new project and you see an SQS queue and you see a Lambda function and you see that, you can understand that and you can see that on a chart and just know how it works, and that's really cool, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, this is great. We all got to kind of jump in there. It looks like Ro said he couldn't get on, but he can share his stuff here, so I give him a chance to jump in as well. I share the same sentiment with you, Paul. I heard about event-driven systems so many times while learning Lambda, to the point where it almost scared me off. Meanwhile, the concept isn't that complex, and that's a really good point. We use a lot of jargon, and to be honest, sometimes things can be just simplified, right? And sometimes speaking like a human versus like a robot can be seen as not being as intelligent. But in reality, the more people that you can actually reach with your words is actually probably the sign of intelligence or something. I don't know. Like whoever is a lot more nuanced with their communication could probably make sense. So on that topic, the next thing would be, hey, developer experience. It's super important. It's very critical to adoption. I'm sure y'all remember when serverless was first kicking off, maybe after API Gateway was released. Personally, I started around 2017, and I can say that trying to work with AppSync at least around like right after the release was no documentation, no tutorials. I've probably told this story like 100 times now, but I was trying to build this like fintech app using AppSync way too early, partially because we wanted to use it for marketing material as well, that we're using these services and so on. I was the developer that pulled that straw. And so I remember sitting on the floor of my apartment in almost like not a panic attack, but I was like very distraught because I was like, I've got timelines, I can't make it work, all these VTL templates, what the heck is going on? And now we can see we've come a long way since like, maybe that was like 2018 or something, to where we are today, like 3-4 years later with something like AWS AppSync. And so on that note, developer experience wise, what are your thoughts on it? Tooling, et cetera. What do you use on a day-to-day basis? How critical is it that we keep enhancing developer experience as we go on? On that topic, let me throw it back to Sebastian.
Sure. Yeah, and it's super important, of course. And like, as I said, I've mostly used serverless framework. I've dabbled with a couple with the other major players as well. Like I think SST's Lambda debug is a game changer. It's amazing, I think. And generally, I think we do still have some ways to go. I remember I a couple of weeks ago I was building a project with step functions, and I was just it was the first larger thing I built with step functions. I was just sitting there. And I couldn't really figure out like, how is everyone else doing this, because I'm pulling my hair out doing this. And I mean, there are a couple of tools. There's like they have like built into the console of AWS. They have like this state transform simulator thingy, which is really, really good. But yeah, I just think that there's a long way to go around a lot of these services and developer experience wide, and it's good that there's so much competition in the space. I think generally the way you can affect it in your organizations and as a single developer, I think, is kind of in the same way that we talked about before. Just making it very easy and safe to experiment and test. Having these developer sandboxes, for example, that you're free to experiment in, and you have, for example, like a monthly budget or something, which just as a safeguard to try stuff out without risk of breaking anything, without risk of causing too much cost or something like that. And making it easy to deploy early and experiment, like go to cloud as early as possible, I think is the way to make it a great developer experience for the developers in your organization.
Yeah, completely agree. And on that one, let me toss it to Benoît. What are your thoughts on topic serverless DX tooling? And I think just realized on my notepad, I have a notepad on the side where I'm like listing everything off, and I wrote DX tooling and tooling, and that's why that was confusing. So what are your thoughts on serverless DX and tooling?
For me, the biggest pain point, and I think that Sebastian just mentioned it, is some developer feedback, like being able to code, write infrastructure, and test it quickly. There are some solutions, like Sebastian mentioned, SST local Lambda. I've never tried it, but I've heard about it. It looks like a really, really game changer indeed. But still, there's things that are hard to test locally, like maybe step function or more complex queues, etc. For me, I'm trying to move away. I moved away a while ago from trying to do this locally, like local stack, stuff like that. They are okay, but in the end, they don't reflect 100% what the infrastructure would do at the end. So I'm stuck with deploying each time that I want to try something new. Except if it's code, maybe I can try to unit test locally or something, but generally, deploying is the only way. Now, there are solutions like SAM has SAM Accelerate. There is CDK Hot Swap, stuff like that, which really helps. At least it goes a little faster than it used to be with just plain CloudFormation, but it's still a bit slow. So I really, really hope that there was a better way to do it. But for now, it's just not really universal. There's no one universal solution to this. So hopefully we'll get there, maybe with some help with the CloudFormation improvement. I don't know. But that's the main pain point. I mean, I still feel more confident testing in the cloud anyways, because I know then when I deploy to production, it's going to work. And also deploying to production, deploying to the cloud helps you detect other issues like IAM permissions that might be wrong. That if you test locally, you're testing with your God mode IAM role user, which won't detect some sort of these issues. The second pain point related to this a bit is testing. So when you want to run unit tests or integration tests with tools like Jest or something, you really want to, again, test in the cloud. So you want to deploy first, then run your test suite. This usually is slow because, well, first of all, you have to deploy, but then running a Lambda function, well, it's just going to take a while to just call the service and get a response back rather than just running the code locally on your machine. And then because of the nature of serverless, because everything is event-based, as we discussed earlier, it's also hard to actually test something properly, and you have to wait maybe for the event to actually be consumed and then the outcome to be produced, and then you have to somehow grab that output. And there is currently no real solution to actually do this easily. There was something else I wanted to say regarding this. Sorry, I forgot. Anyways, but yeah, testing is also some hard things to do because you have some things like maybe even bridge that you have to watch. I don't know, if you want to test, there's an event. How do you grab that event? And regarding that, there's actually something that we are working on at Serverless Guru that we'll hopefully make public very, very soon to solve these kind of issues. But also now I remember what I wanted to say with event-driven or event-based architecture is that when you run a test, say you run a series of 10 tests, and in the first test, you run and you test a scenario and you do something, the outcome is positive, good, go on to the next step. But in the background, maybe your first test emitted some kind of event that triggers something else, then that something else triggers something else, and there's that domino effect that triggers many events all over the place during your test suite execution, and that actually can mess up with future tests. And that's also something that we struggled with in my team previously. So we found solutions to that. So the trick is to use correlation IDs that are unique to your test, to your single execution test, and not reusing them, so having them to be dynamic, random. But still, in the background, there are still many things that happen. Luckily, with serverless, because it's free, well, basically free or very cheap, it's not really important, but you just have to be aware of it, because otherwise you could have some bad surprises.
Yeah, basically to jump in there based on my own thing, and also hearing all you making a case for why it's testing is still complex. Like there's a lot that we still have to figure out in terms of establishing best practices around it. And obviously there's more tooling that are out there based on the different infrastructure as code provider that you're using that can somehow, in some ways help, but in some ways, as well, as you were saying there, like you have one event that triggers another event that triggers 3 events. Okay, now that starts to get very complex. You almost need to have a mirror environment set up to then be able to really see how it's actually performing. Luckily, infrastructure as code allows us to create those things. However, the management of that for testing is still tricky, as you're saying, because it's slow deployments and all that stuff. Yeah, I think I was going to say something, but I will toss it to Paul first before I jump in. Paul, what are your thoughts? Serverless developer experience tooling, where are you at with all this?
Yeah, man, this is a big topic. Developer experience. It's very hot these days. So hot right now. But like, first of all, nobody's mentioned Architect, the open source serverless framework, arc.codes. It's amazing. I believe that it has the best local solution for developing web apps out of any framework. You just got to try it out. It works amazingly well local. And I really enjoyed using it. I've also used CDK. I've also used Terraform. I've used all the different tools, and each one has its pros and cons. Actually, as I use them, I kind of see like, oh, these are just tools. And so for the developers out there who are being overwhelmed by tooling choice, I get it. I feel you, like really hard, man. And my advice to you would be to just pick one. It doesn't matter which one, honestly. Just pick one and use it, because it's gonna let you be more expressive as you understand its like way of doing things. And for developers who are new to this is an incredible opportunity right now, because nobody has the way. Everyone is free and open to create tools for themselves to build the way they like. And because of the way these cloud resources are available to us, they are only like an actual like program line hit away. So you can use all of your fancy dev brain knowledge to help you build your own tools. And I'm not saying everybody should go build their own framework, but everybody eventually builds their own framework. Let's be honest, right? Like everybody will take it and then it changes and changes and changes again. And if we look at these like really big enterprise organizations, they have a framework. It's their corporate culture, and there are tools, and the tools that you have an opportunity to build, because this is a new paradigm. Like nobody else has done it yet. Like this is your time to shine. If you've ever sat and said, man, I really can do great work as a developer. Nobody's just really seeing it. Build a tool on the serverless platform. People will see it because they're like, oh, I didn't know I could do this. Like Sebastian's got this one for IAM. Like, it's so cool. Like, obviously it's such a like an obvious thing because IAM is a beast, and it's worth like you have to figure it out. But it just takes somebody like Sebastian and says like, yeah, you know what? This is my best shot at it. And I really appreciate that. And like everybody listening to this has that opportunity right now because it's so new. And I think that's really cool. And when we talk about the developer experience, we really don't think enough about like we think it like these tools are supposed to be perfect already somehow. But we know after building our own software, like there's no such thing as this perfect environment. There are always going to be these trade-offs, and this is the essence of what we do as developers and the opportunity that we have. And I think that that's just a wonderful thing to make the tools better and to contribute back to tools that you love, like serverless, like Architect, like CDK. I personally don't use CDK all that much, and I see it as a very niche thing in my mind for my use cases. But that's cool. Like that's what I came to after doing the mental exercises and trying it out. But the tools are always going to keep changing, and I hope they keep getting better. I know they will keep getting better. And that's what I'm looking forward to, man. Like one day I just think of a function and Google's got it running on a neural network somewhere. Like I just look at my computer and I go, get me a div, please. And like it shows up. I'm like, great. And I'm just like, put a tag in that div, please. And then it shows up. Great. Like that one day we'll be all like that, just groaning at our computers to the neural network going, please give me a div. And then hide it when somebody clicks on it. That's all I need.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, thank you for taking us down that journey and also being so inspirational at the same time. Yeah, to those listening, it is a great time to build stuff. I mean, the big thing is that if you would have started building a monitoring tool in 2017 for serverless, you probably would have been competing against like Dashboard and Epsagon and Lamigo and all the big names just because they were all starting around the same time. And so there's a huge amount of stuff that you can do. I wrote a couple of things down, like, do you want to tackle the infrastructure as code piece, which I'll talk about in a second, CI/CD, observability things, alerting. Maybe you just help send stuff to Slack. Maybe you make that super organized and very seamless, and that's what you make your thing about, or Teams, or whatever that looks like. Building stuff. So building infrastructure as code faster, building application code faster. What we're seeing now with some tooling is automating the infrastructure through the code itself. So using like annotations that say like Lambda, or using specific function stuff like Serverless Cloud is doing things like that too. Also managing. I was at the developer conference in Brazil. There was a company there called StackSpot, and they started inside of Itaú Bank, which is one of the biggest banks in the world. And they solved a solution for themselves, which was like managing of templates and what they call stacks. And from a high level, they're not helping you build the templates or these like stacks, but they're allowing you to manage and organize it. So there's a whole thing around how do I manage and organize all of this serverless stuff, right? And that's also an opening there, and sharing it, right? How do you properly share this stuff around? There's all these different tools. There's all these different deployment mechanisms. There's all these different options for infrastructure. How do you actually share stuff properly between all those things? And how do you reuse that knowledge and make it make sense? So all that is like super cool. There's a lot of crazy stuff happening. On the infrastructure as code side, I wanted to call out, we've been working on a project for a long time. And it's one of those things that when you try to build I was told by a colleague, advisor sort of person, creating a product and also and doing a consulting company at the same time is like almost impossible. And I understand exactly where he's coming from, because, you know, the day-to-day of Serverless Guru, obviously for our clients, delivering is always first priority. And so anything that we do internally usually gets like shelved. And so finding time to do that stuff, but different topic, different panel. On the infrastructure as code piece, one thing we've been working on is something called Cloud GTO. It is a dynamic template generator for a serverless framework. So very simple UI, you input a couple things. I want a REST API, I want these Lambdas, I want it to do like Node.js 14, and I want packaging and so on. And then it basically just spits out serverless framework templates that do all that and connect it together. The goal behind that is, I was working with serverless framework for a long time. That's the infrastructure as code choice that I have. And I've got a whole bunch of experience built up in this one specific area. I don't know much about CDK infrastructure as code development. And so I was like, what if I just made something that automates part of that? And that's sort of what that is. We've got a V1 that's like private right now, and you'll see more about that. As you can imagine, as you get closer to actually releasing to production, you're like, no, we're not ready. So hope we're going to try to by like end of September, mid-October is a new date. But that's all it does at the moment. You want to build a REST API, click a couple buttons, spits out serverless framework stuff. If it's useful, great. If it's not useful, that's also cool too. And if you use something that's not serverless framework, that's totally fine as well. All G. So on that, developer experience, super important, a lot of opportunity, a lot of areas. I do want to give Sebastian time to tell us about this IAM tooling part that you built. Can you give us, the audience, everybody, an idea for what that is?
Yeah, sure. So, well, like everyone else, I suppose, you know, I struggled with, you know, coming up with these privilege policies for my Lambda functions, stuff like that in serverless framework, specifically for me at the time, at least. And I remember that, like, you know, the IAM reference documentation page. I every time I stumbled upon that, I just kept thinking to myself, like, this resource is so good. Like, this explains exactly everything. It explains every action, every service there, and all the condition keys and everything you can do with this. And so, like, once you actually spend the energy to go there and look everything up, it's usually pretty clear what you actually have to do. But like, when you're actually in your editor and writing the policy, you try once and then you get a failure and something like that. So you put a star, just a wildcard, and you deploy it, and then you hopefully remember to change it back and look it up and stuff like that. So one day I just figured, wouldn't it be really cool to just take this documentation and make sort of an inline plugin to this to autocomplete all of this. I'd never built a plugin before, so I struggled a bit in the beginning, but then I came up with the name IAM Legend, and I just knew that I had to finish it. So I was so ready to give up, but then I came up with the name, and I just, okay, I'll have to finish this. This is too good. And yeah, so there's a plugin now for VS Code that's called IAM Legend, and it just it's like when you're writing an IAM policy and serverless framework, SAM, even CDK, actually, if you're writing it in JSTS, it will autocomplete like all the services and the actions, and like give you inline the documentation for it, and then explain like what all the condition keys and everything that belongs to it does. And it also supports like wildcards. So if you say like, okay, so I need DynamoDB and star get star, it will actually like expand all of those for you in the hover, so that you can see like exactly what actions will be covered by this policy. And yeah, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Kudos for choosing like potentially the best name possible for that. That's just amazing. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, with that, Benoît, Paul, I know that we're 4 minutes over time. You know, final thoughts for the audience here, and then I'll give Sebastian a chance to shout out stuff that you're doing as well in this space.
Yeah, just thanks everybody for watching. Hit that subscribe button down below, click like, do all the things. Give us all shout outs on Twitters. If you're in the audience, send us questions about serverless. And, you know, this is amazing. Also, I wasn't able to write IAM policies until Sebastian's tool. I literally would just put ** everywhere, you know, because it seemed to work. I don't know what everyone's really complaining about. Just put ** everywhere. No, don't do that. Please don't. It's a joke. But thanks for my time.
Yeah, well, for me, as I mentioned, as I teased earlier, at Serverless Guru, we've been working the past few weeks on a new tool to hopefully help developers test serverless applications. Hopefully, it's going to be a great help for them. And yes, we did build our own framework as well, even though some things already exist around that. But hopefully, it's going to be a different approach, and it's going to be different, and people are going to like it. Yeah, thank you for being here, and follow Serverless Guru, follow everyone on Twitter, subscribe, and see you next month, I guess.
Awesome. Sebastian, anything to shout out, things that you got coming up?
All right, yeah. So first of all, thank you for letting me come on here and talk serverless with you guys. It's been really fun. Do follow me at Tasteful Elk on most social media, or at least Twitter, maybe not most. You can also follow at Elva Group if you want to come along in our journey building a serverless first consulting company. And yeah, thank you.
Awesome, cool. Well, that's a wrap. We did it. We're going to have another one at the end of this month, so 2 in September. That's fantastic. Thank you again, Sebastian, for being our special guest. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Benoît. Thank you, audience. And with that, we are closed. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
See you.
Thank you. Bye.